This video is going to help you open bank accounts for your offshore company. I'm going to do this by giving you 4 cheat codes to the biggest reasons that offshore companies get denied by banks. And in case you're wondering who I am and how I even got these cheat codes in the first place, my name is Chris and I'm the head of banking relationships here at GlobalBanks. We help investors, entrepreneurs, and owners of offshore companies solve cross-border banking problems. And in this video, I'm going to be helping 2 types of people in particular. First, I'm going to be helping anyone that already has an offshore company with a bank account. We all know that accounts get closed, especially with offshore companies and complex structures. And that's because offshore companies are considered higher risk at almost all banks. So if that's you, I'm going to give you 2 cheat codes that will help you keep your accounts open. Second, this video is for anyone who needs to open a new bank account for an offshore company. If that's you, the other 2 cheat codes are going to help you quickly decide how and where to open bank accounts. But in addition to these cheat codes, I also want to arm everyone watching with 3 really important facts that owners of offshore companies they keep overlooking. Fact number 1 is that offshore companies have limited banking options when compared to other entities. I don't care if you're incorporated in BVI, Belize, Seychelles, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Bahamas, Panama, or anywhere else. If you have an offshore company, you have limited banking options compared to many other structures, though certain offshore companies obviously have more options than others. The real takeaway here is that you need to take each bank account application seriously, because if your offshore company gets denied on a technicality, you may have just wasted one of the only banking options that was available to your company to begin with. All right, and the second fact is that offshore companies do not get to open accounts with 0 deposits, not real bank accounts anyway. But that shouldn't matter, because if you're investing in an offshore structure to take advantage of the tax benefits or other benefits that an offshore company can offer, there's a trade-off that you need to make. And when you're comparing offshore companies to onshore companies like a resident LLC or corporation, the trade-off that you need to make is a qualifying deposit, which we'll discuss in a little bit. And the third and final fact that I want to arm you with before sharing the cheat codes is this. There are a lot of corporate service providers, accountants, and even lawyers that will sell the dream of setting up an offshore company and operating at 0 tax. But, and this is a very big but, just because your company is registered in an offshore country with 0% tax, it doesn't mean it pays 0% tax. If you live in a country with CFC rules like the United States, the UK, Canada, Germany, France, Spain, Australia, basically any developed country, your offshore company will almost always be taxed as a local operating business, completely eliminating any of the tax benefits that you would have gained by having the company offshore. The point is, if you're structuring an offshore company for tax purposes, you should speak with a qualified tax professional to make sure that you're making smart choices. Because in most cases, the taxation attributed to your offshore company, it's ultimately going to be decided by your country of residence. Okay, so quick recap here. Offshore companies, they have limited banking options. They need to take every application seriously, and they will need to make qualifying deposits. And lastly, they will only offer you tax benefits if you have both your personal and corporate setup in check. All right, so with those 3 facts, you're better prepared than about 75 to 80% of people that are trying to open accounts for offshore companies. And with the cheat codes that I'm about to share, you're gonna be better off than around 90% of people trying to open accounts. So before I share the cheat codes, do me a favor and hit the like button, because that tells us that you're getting value out of this type of video, and we should keep making more of them for you in the future. All right, so now that we're all on the same page, let's dig into the account opening problems and the specific cheat codes that you can use to overcome them. First up, finding banks that will accept your company. And no, this isn't some trivial statement. If you have a company that is registered in an offshore jurisdiction, there are very few banks that will even consider opening accounts for you. So what should you do? What's the cheat code? Well, it involves 4 key factors: your company, you, the country, and the banks. More specifically, where do you have ties that you can prove to the bank? Where does your company have economic ties, like suppliers or customers? Which of those countries has an openness to offshore companies? And then which of the banks in those countries are even willing to accept offshore structures? Basically, if you overlap your answers to these 4 questions, you can usually narrow down your list of potential banks that you can start contacting. Though if you just want the answers given to you, you can always go to globalbanks.com/insider, and our team is happy to help you out. All right, that was the first problem. Now, the next problem is meeting economic substance requirements. And this one can be a bit tough, especially if you don't already have economic substance in a particular country. And it's made even more difficult by the fact that each country has different tests you need to pass for substance, and each bank interprets those tests differently and can make it harder or easier for you to prove. All right, so what's the cheat code? How can you prove substance in the easiest way possible? Well, there are a few ways. Again, this isn't going to work everywhere. The Cayman Islands, for example, is extremely difficult to open in because it's so tough to meet economic substance requirements, but this can work in other countries. And the cheat code is to establish commercial relationships with local suppliers, hire local employees, or even onboard legitimate customers from the country where you want to bank. Of course, this isn't a silver bullet and it's not going to work for everyone, but if you can take this approach, it'll help you meet one of the toughest requirements that banks impose on offshore companies. All right, so problem number 3 is meeting deposit and balance requirements. Now, if you're flush with cash, you don't have to think very hard about this problem. But if not, this section is going to be important for you. Again, like I said in the 3 facts earlier, your offshore company, it will need to make a qualifying deposit. So how can you overcome the challenge of deposit and balance requirements if you don't have a ton of money? Well, the cheat code here is one word, and that is investing. Bottom line, money, it isn't just money. It's a way for banks to generate a profit. And there are different methods that banks use to generate profits. Some of those methods are more profitable than others. And when it comes to offshore companies, banks, they have a few options available, including lending, fees, creative financing solutions, and investing. And no surprise here, if you can make use of lending or creative financing, you'll have more options available. But if you're struggling to meet deposit requirements, lending and creative financing are probably not going to be available to you. So one way that you can overcome deposit requirements is by investing the balance of your deposit. You are still going to need to make a deposit, but if you're willing to do this, banks can sometimes reduce the deposit requirements considerably, between 25 and 50% of their original requirement. So quick example here, if you're being asked to deposit, say $200,000, maybe you can invest your funds and only commit $100,000 to $150,000. And this is just an example. In many other places, you can open bank accounts for offshore companies with considerably lower amounts. If you want a quick roadmap of the deposit requirements and some of the best hubs for offshore companies, you can grab our free guide, Where to Bank Offshore. I asked the team to put it in the pinned comment below for you, so you can go ahead and grab your copy right there. Now, the 4th and final problem that we're gonna cover is extremely important for you to understand whether you have an account or you need to open an account, and that is answering questions incorrectly. What I'm talking about here is questions from your bank about compliance concerns, transaction activities, transacting parties, or even accessing your account from unfamiliar countries. And I just want to add a really important note here. If your bank is asking you questions about any of these activities, consider yourself lucky, because most of the time, when a high-risk client, like an offshore company, engages in activity that warrants follow-up questions, banks will usually just close the account. Likewise, if you indicate on an application that you plan to engage in any activity that the bank deems risky, most banks, they'll just deny the application. So questions are good, but what's the cheat code? How can you overcome these questions? Well, it involves 3 key factors: being upfront, being transparent, and supporting your actions. Now, what do I mean by these? Well, first, if you have an account and plan to engage in any activities that the bank might deem risky, you should contact your banker. Let them know and ask if the bank would have any problems with this particular transaction or transacting party. Second, your bank is going to see your transaction activity. Any high-risk behaviors, they're going to be flagged by internal systems. There's basically nowhere to hide. So you should be completely transparent with your bank, both during the account opening process and when using your account. And lastly, supporting your actions. Here, I'm talking about providing bank with supporting documents, proof of commercial relationships, and whatever other information they might want in order to understand your transactions or answer any other questions. And that's basically it. With the 3 facts and the 4 cheat codes that I just shared, you're now ahead of about 90% of people looking to open accounts for offshore companies. And if you want to take your banking to the next level, here's the craziest thing that I've ever said about opening accounts for offshore companies that no one else is going to tell you. I'll see you over there right now.